The morning after my wedding, I could not stand. My legs would not hold me. I tried to push myself up from the bed and the pain pulled me back down like a hand pressed flat against my chest. I lay there, staring at the ceiling boards, counting the knots in the wood, the way you count something when you don't want to feel what you're feeling. My husband had already left for the barn. He did not look back when he left. I remember the sound of the door. I remember thinking that the sound was very ordinary, and that nothing about my life was ordinary anymore, and that no one seemed to notice the difference. My name is Martha. I was born into the Amish community in Lancaster County, and I lived under the Ordnung for 27 years. I am a former Amish woman, and I speak now because the silence was never my own to keep. It was given to me before I could ask whether I wanted it. This channel is for the stories the church told us to forget. This is one of them, and it is not the only one, but it is the one that taught me everything else I would come to understand later, too late to undo what had already been done to my body. Marriage, I was raised to believe, was the great gift of womanhood, the reward for a life lived in obedience. We were taught from childhood that our purpose was to be helpmeets, to bear children, to keep the home in order, to be quiet and useful and grateful. The wedding night itself was never spoken of in plain words. It existed in the space between women, passed along in half-sentences and knowing looks. The older women would only say that it was a duty, that a wife must submit with a glad heart, that the Lord had ordained it so. They said that any pain was natural, that it was part of what a woman gives, and that we should offer it up to God rather than speak of it aloud. I was 19 when I married Eli. He was kind enough in public. He smiled at the right times, he did not strike me, and he did not raise his voice, not once in all the months I knew him before we married. But he was a man of the church, raised the same as I was, and he believed in the old ways just as surely as I had been taught to believe in them. Neither of us had been given any other way to believe. The wedding took place at the home of his parents, the way weddings always did. We ate, we sang the old hymns, we were married before the congregation with our hands folded and our heads bowed. It was, in its way, a beautiful day. I want to say that because it is true, and because the beauty of that day makes what came after harder to hold, not easier. That night, we went to his house, which was now mine, though nothing in it felt like mine yet. I had been told to be ready, to lie still, to not resist, to trust that my husband knew what was expected of him, even if I did not know what was expected of me. I did as I was told. I had been taught my whole life to do as I was told. When it was over, I bled. I bled more than I expected, more than felt right, though I had nothing to compare it to, no measure for what right was supposed to feel like. I told myself it was simply part of the duty, the price of the gift I had been promised. I did not cry, because I had been taught that crying was a sign of ungratefulness, a sign that I did not trust God's plan for my life. In the morning, I tried to rise to fix breakfast, because a wife who cannot rise and fix breakfast is a wife who has failed at the one thing she was put on this earth to do. But the pain was so sharp that I could not straighten my back. I crawled to the kitchen on my hands and knees, across the cold floorboards, and I made the fire, and I boiled the water, because I did not know what else there was to do. There was no one to ask. There was no language for what I was feeling that did not already come with an answer built into it. This is normal. This is your duty. This is what a glad heart looks like even when it doesn't feel glad at all. When my mother-in-law arrived that afternoon, she found me hunched over the stove, moving the way old women move, though I was 19. She asked why I was so slow. I told her I was tired. She nodded, the way you nod at something you already expected to hear. She said that all new wives are tired, that it was only natural, that it would pass. She did not ask about the bloodstains on the bed, which she must have seen when she went in to change the linens, because that was her way of helping a new wife settle into a house. She did not ask about the way I could not sit properly in a chair, the way I perched on its very edge like the seat itself might hurt me. She said only that I should be grateful that Eli had been patient with me, that some men were not so gentle, that I did not know how fortunate I was. She said this without looking at me, the way you speak to a wall or a stove or a memory, not to the person standing in front of you. I learned something that day that I would carry with me for years afterward. I learned that pain was not a reason to speak. It was a reason to be quieter. It was a reason to fold yourself smaller so that no one would have to see what speaking would require them to acknowledge. Later that week, my aunt came to visit, a woman of 60 with hands that had kneaded bread and scrubbed floors and raised 8 children of her own for 50 years. She found me lying flat on my stomach in the bedroom because I could not bear any other position, and the house was quiet, and I thought I was alone with it. She did not say a word at first. She simply sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window, at the fields, at whatever it is that women look at when they are trying not to look at the thing in front of them. After a long silence, long enough that I thought she might leave without speaking at all, she said, "Martha, I walked like you walked for 3 years after my wedding. I thought it was the Lord's will. Then one day I went to a doctor in town, a woman doctor who did not know our ways, who had not been raised the way we were raised. She asked me one question. She said, 'Who told you this was normal?' I had no answer for her." My aunt spoke these words to the curtains, not to me. She never once looked in my direction while she said them. When she finished, she stood up and left the room, and that was the only warning I ever received in my entire life from anyone about anything. One sentence spoken to a window by a woman who could not bring herself to look at the girl she was trying to save. My aunt's words stayed with me every single day after that. I began to notice things I had never let myself notice before. I noticed that other young wives in the district walked differently too, in the weeks after their weddings. The particular way they lowered themselves onto the edge of a chair, the way they winced when they lifted a child onto their hip, the way conversations about the wedding night were always conducted in silences and glances rather than words. I began to ask myself, quietly, in the part of my mind that I kept hidden even from myself, what exactly I had accepted without ever being permitted to question it. I began to understand that the church had told us suffering was holy, that suffering was, in fact, the very shape of a godly life for a woman, but that no one had ever told us what suffering was supposed to look like, or where the line was between a duty faithfully carried and a body that had been genuinely harmed. No one had told us that bleeding for a week afterward was not a blessing to be endured. No one had told us that pain sharp enough to keep a grown woman crawling across her own kitchen floor was not the natural cost of a glad heart. 3 months into my marriage, I finally saw a doctor, when I could no longer hide the fever that had settled into my body alongside the pain. A fever that frightened even Eli enough that he agreed to drive me into the English town, to a clinic neither of us had ever set foot in before. The doctor was a young woman with kind eyes and a manner that was gentle but very direct, nothing like the women I had grown up around who spoke to walls and windows rather than to the person in front of them. She examined me, and I watched her face change as she did, the way a face changes when it is trying very hard not to show alarm. She looked at me, and she asked, very softly, the same question my aunt had once spoken to a curtain. "Who told you this was normal?" I did not have an answer for her either. The doctor's question followed me out of that clinic and into every year that came after it. An infection, the doctor told me, had gone untreated for months inside my own body. Entirely preventable, entirely treatable, if only someone had looked at me sooner. If only I had been given permission to say that something was wrong. She said it would have been a simple thing to fix had I come to her earlier. She said, and I remember these words exactly, that nothing about what I had experienced had been inevitable. She said that I had been injured, plainly and simply injured, and that an injury is never a duty, no matter what anyone tells you it is. I did not know what to do with her words. I could not carry them home to Eli. I could not carry them to my mother, who would only have told me to be grateful, the way my mother-in-law had been grateful, the way every woman before me had learned to be grateful for the exact same silence. I could only sit in the car on the drive home and feel that question echo somewhere behind my ribs over and over, without an answer, without anywhere to put it down. Over the years that followed, that question became a small light I carried without anyone else knowing I carried it. It did not save me, not then, not for a long time. I stayed. I raised children. I kept house. I did the things a woman in my position was expected to do, and I did them, for the most part, without complaint, because complaint had never once been shown to change anything. But that question gave me something to hold on to in the moments when the elders told me that my body was not entirely my own, that it belonged first to God, and then to my husband, and only somewhere far down that list, to me. It gave me permission, slowly, over years, to doubt the silence I had been raised inside of. And eventually, it gave me permission to leave. If you are watching this, and you have felt that same pain, the kind you were told to endure without a name for it, the kind no one around you was willing to acknowledge out loud, I want you to hear something clearly. You were not wrong to hurt. You were not ungrateful for feeling what you felt. You were not weak for struggling to rise from a bed the morning after you were told the worst of it was over. You were told a lie, and that lie was wrapped carefully in scripture and tradition and the quiet approval of women who had survived the same lie themselves. And you believed it because you were given no reason not to, because believing it was the only option anyone ever placed in front of you. I see you. I see the way you learned to hide your limp before anyone could ask about it. I see the way you stopped asking questions, because questions were never answered, only redirected toward gratitude. I see the way you still carry the ache in your back, even now, even years later, even in a life that looks nothing like the one you left. The doctor's question is yours too, if you want it. Who told you this was normal? You do not have to accept whatever answer you were given as a girl. You are allowed to ask it again, as many times as you need to, until an answer finally comes that does not require your silence in exchange. I tell these stories because I am no longer afraid of the truth, even the parts of it that are difficult to say out loud, even the parts that some people in my old life would rather I kept buried. The truth, as I have come to understand it, is that our bodies were never the enemy. They were never the thing that needed correcting or enduring or offering up. The silence was the enemy. The silence was always the enemy, dressed up as faith, dressed up as duty, dressed up as a glad heart. If you want to hear more about what we were never allowed to say, about the things that happened behind closed doors in houses that looked peaceful from the road, please subscribe to this channel. I will keep speaking, even when my voice shakes. I will keep remembering, even the parts I would rather forget. And I will not stop, not until the last lie has finally been named for exactly what it is.